The diploma shook in my trembling hands as the words cut through the air like shattered glass. My biggest mistake is standing right there in a cap and gown. My father's voice, loud enough for nearby families to hear, sliced through what should have been my proudest moment. The sea of graduation caps and beaming parents suddenly felt miles away as shame burned through my chest. I forced a smile, but inside, something hardened like concrete. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alexandra Mitchell. I'm 29 years old and a real estate attorney at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. This is the story of how I took back my power from the man who never believed I was worth anything at all. Growing up in Lexington, Massachusetts, I learned early that nothing I did would ever be enough for my father, Richard Mitchell. He was a self-made real estate developer who built an empire from nothing, and he never let anyone forget it. The graduation ceremony had been picture perfect until that moment. May sunshine warming the university quad, proud families clutching bouquets, professors in their ceremonial robes. I'd graduated summa cum laude from Boston University's law program, something I'd worked toward since I was 12. My mother stood beside my father, her face a practiced mask of neutrality that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. She'd perfected the art of not rocking the boat. "Congratulations, sweetie," she whispered, hugging me quickly before my father could interject with another cutting remark. My younger brother Jake, the golden child, shuffled uncomfortably in his expensive loafers. He'd never been subjected to our father's particular brand of cruelty. "Dad's just tired from the drive," he offered weakly. "Let's get this over with," my father said, checking his watch. "I've got a meeting with investors at 4. He didn't bother lowering his voice when he added, "Waste of a perfectly good afternoon watching her collect a piece of paper that'll gather dust." 3 years of law school, countless all-nighters, and graduating at the top of my class, reduced to an inconvenience in his busy schedule. I'd seen this coming, had prepared myself for his indifference, but the public humiliation still stung. My roommate Camilla caught my eye from across the lawn where she stood with her large, enthusiastic family. She mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded, though we both knew it was a lie. The day I'd received my acceptance letter to Boston University's law program, my father had laughed. "Law? You don't have the spine for it. You'll drop out by Thanksgiving." But spite is a powerful motivator. Every time I considered giving up during those grueling years of study, I'd hear his voice and push harder. Later that evening, my family gathered at Martello's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. My father had reluctantly agreed to the dinner, though he made it clear it was an imposition. I sat across from him, watching as he charmed the waiter, transformed into the charismatic businessman everyone else knew. The public Richard Mitchell was a far cry from the man who ruled our household with cutting words and impossible expectations. "So, Alexandra," he said, swirling his red wine, "found a job yet? Or should we expect you back in your childhood bedroom next week?" His tone was light, as though he were making a harmless joke. But I knew better. My mother tensed beside him. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "I've accepted an associate position at Harrington, Wells and Pierce." I watched his expression carefully, waiting for some sign of approval. Harrington was one of the top real estate law firms in New England. Even he couldn't dismiss this accomplishment. "Harrington?" He raised an eyebrow. "Must be desperate for diversity hires this year." Jake choked on his water and my mother placed a warning hand on my father's arm, which he promptly shrugged off. I felt something inside me crack. 22 years of trying to earn this man's approval, and for what? "You know what, Dad? I'm done." I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. I'm done trying to prove myself to someone who decided I was worthless before I could even walk. My father's face darkened. "Sit down, you're making a scene." "No," I said, feeling strangely calm. "I've sat down and shut up my entire life. Congratulations. You finally pushed too far." My mother reached for my hand. "Alexandra, please, it's your graduation dinner." "Is it?" "Because it feels like another opportunity for him to remind me that I'm his biggest mistake." I grabbed my purse. ignoring the stares from neighboring tables. "I'll see you at home, Mom." Outside, the evening air was cool against my flushed face. I walked aimlessly for blocks, my graduation heels pinching with every step, but I barely noticed the pain. My phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from Jake, from my mother, even one from Camilla asking if I wanted to join her family's celebration instead. I ignored them all. It wasn't until I reached the Boston Common that I finally sat down on a bench, watching as the sky darkened and the park lights flickered on. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to imagine a future completely separate from my father's crushing expectations, a future where I didn't constantly seek approval I would never receive. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Harrington, confirming my start date. In 3 weeks, I would begin my career at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. Despite everything, a small smile formed on my lips. I had done this. Me. Not because of my father, but in spite of him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 2 years passed in a blur of 60-hour work weeks, coffee-fueled all-nighters, and the slow climb up the corporate ladder. I'd moved into a small but stylish apartment in Back Bay, decorated exactly as I wanted without my father's disapproving comments. Contact with my family had dwindled to obligatory holiday gatherings and the occasional Sunday dinner when guilt got the better of me. My relationship with my father remained strained, though we'd settled into a cold detente. He'd stopped making openly disparaging remarks, instead adopting a dismissive silence whenever my career came up in conversation. Somehow, his silence was worse than his criticism had been. At least his criticism acknowledged my existence. At Harrington, I'd found my niche in foreclosure law. There was something satisfying about the clear-cut nature of it. Contracts were either honored or broken, payments were either made or missed, properties were either kept or lost. Black and white. No gray areas where emotions could muddy the waters. "Alexandra, you have a minute." My boss, Margaret Harrington herself, appeared in my office doorway one Tuesday morning. At 58, Margaret was a legend in Boston legal circles, brilliant, formidable, and notoriously selective about which associates she mentored. "Of course," I said, quickly minimizing the document I'd been working on. Margaret rarely visited associate offices in person. Whatever this was, it was important. She closed the door behind her and took a seat across from my desk. "I have a sensitive case that requires discretion and a steady hand. Given your performance over the past 2 years, I think you're ready for it." Pride swelled in my chest, but I kept my expression professional. "I'd be honored. It's a foreclosure situation involving Mitchell Properties." She slid a folder across my desk. "I believe the principal is a relative of yours?" My blood ran cold. Mitchell Properties was my father's company, the empire he'd built from nothing, his pride and joy. "He's my father," I admitted. "I should probably recuse myself due to the conflict of interest." Margaret shook her head. "That would be the case if you were defending him. We're representing Suffolk Bank and Trust. Your father's company has defaulted on a series of loans for a major development project in the Seaport District. The bank is moving to foreclose." My mind raced. My father's company was in financial trouble? It seemed impossible. Richard Mitchell had always been the picture of success. The self-made millionaire who never missed a payment, who prided himself on his business acumen. "The bank specifically requested you," Margaret continued. "Apparently, your reputation for handling complex foreclosures has reached their ears. Of course, if you're uncomfortable with the assignment—" "No," I said quickly, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I can handle it." A small voice in my head whispered that this was my chance, to prove myself to my father once and for all, to show him that his biggest mistake had become someone to reckon with. Margaret studied me for a moment. "Are you sure? This won't be easy, personally or professionally. Your father's company is fighting the foreclosure aggressively." I opened the folder and scanned the first page. Suffolk Bank had issued a series of loans totaling over $12 million for my father's dream project, a luxury condominium development overlooking Boston Harbor. The architectural renderings showed a gleaming tower of glass and steel, exactly the kind of statement property my father had always coveted. "I'm sure," I said, closing the folder. "I'll begin reviewing the case immediately." After Margaret left, I sat motionless, staring at the folder. My father had never mentioned financial difficulties. In fact, at the last family dinner I'd attended just a month ago, he'd boasted about how well the Seaport project was progressing. Had it all been a lie? Or had things fallen apart so quickly that even he hadn't seen it coming? I called my brother Jake, who worked as the VP of Operations at Mitchell Properties. His assistant put me through immediately, a courtesy I wasn't used to receiving. "Alex? Is everything okay?" Jake sounded genuinely concerned. Despite growing up as our father's favorite, Jake had never been cruel to me. If anything, he'd tried to shield me from the worst of our father's behavior. "I just got assigned to a case involving Dad's company," I said, keeping my voice low though my office door was closed. "Jake, is Mitchell Properties in financial trouble?" The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "How did you find out?" "I'm an attorney at a major law firm that handles foreclosures for Suffolk Bank. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually hear about this?" I tried to keep the accusation out of my voice but failed. Jake sighed heavily. "It's bad, Alex. The Seaport project went over budget by millions. Dad leveraged everything to keep it going. The company headquarters, his investment properties, even the house." My stomach dropped. The house? Our family home? The sprawling colonial in Lexington had been in our family for 3 generations. My mother had often told me it was the one thing my father truly loved. "Yes," Jake confirmed. "The bank is moving to foreclose on all of it. Dad's been trying to find new investors, but word has gotten out about the financial troubles, and no one wants to touch Mitchell Properties right now." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I was the outsider, the disappointment, the mistake. Why would they include me in family crises? "Dad forbade us from mentioning it to anyone," Jake said quietly. "He's still convinced he can turn things around before it becomes public knowledge. His pride won't let him admit he's failing." Pride. The cornerstone of Richard Mitchell's personality. The thing that had made him successful, and now, apparently, the thing that would be his undoing. "Alex." Jake's voice dropped even lower. "If your firm is handling the foreclosure, that means I'm now working for the bank that's trying to take everything from him." I finished. "I know. He'll see it as the ultimate betrayal." I thought about all the years of belittlement, of being told I wasn't good enough, of being called a mistake. I thought about my graduation day, when he'd destroyed what should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. "Maybe it is," I said finally. After hanging up with Jake, I threw myself into reviewing the case files. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. My father's company had been in financial trouble for over a year. He'd taken increasingly desperate measures to keep the Seaport project afloat, leveraging assets that should never have been risked. The bank had been patient, granting extensions and restructuring the loans multiple times, but their patience had finally run out. Most tellingly, my father had leveraged our family home, the home where I'd grown up, where my mother still lived, without my mother's knowledge. He'd forged her signature on the loan documents, a discovery that made my blood boil. Not only was he risking his own legacy, but he was dragging my mother down with him. I stayed at the office until midnight, poring over financial statements and loan agreements. By the time I left, I had a complete understanding of just how precarious my father's situation was, and how straightforward the bank's case would be. Mitchell Properties was in default, the collateral was clearly defined in legally binding agreements, and the bank had every right to seize all of it. Walking to my car in the deserted parking garage, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, felt a vindictive satisfaction. After years of my father's arrogance, of his certainty that he was untouchable, fate had finally caught up with him. And I, the daughter he'd dismissed as worthless, would be the instrument of that fate. But another part of me remembered Sunday dinners at that long mahogany table, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, the rose garden my mother tended so lovingly. Could I really be the one to take that all away? By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made my decision. This case wasn't about revenge. It was about doing my job, about proving, to myself more than anyone, that I was a professional who could separate personal feelings from professional obligations. I would handle this case exactly as I would any other, with thoroughness and impartiality. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Suffolk Bank's representatives to discuss strategy. I didn't mention my personal connection to the case, and Margaret, true to her word about discretion, hadn't shared that information with the clients. As far as they were concerned, I was simply the foreclosure specialist with an impressive track record. "Ms. Mitchell, we appreciate your thoroughness," said Harold Winters, the bank's senior vice president, after I'd presented my analysis of the case. "Given the clear-cut nature of the default, how quickly do you think we can proceed with the foreclosure? If we file the paperwork this week, we could have possession of the properties within 60 days, I replied, keeping my voice professional despite the knot in my stomach. However, I should note that Mitchell Properties is likely to fight this aggressively. Richard Mitchell has a reputation for not giving up easily." Winters smiled thinly. "We're counting on your expertise to make sure that doesn't matter." As I gathered my materials at the end of the meeting, Winters added casually, "By the way, any relation to the Mitchells in question? It's not a common name in Boston legal circles." The question I'd been dreading. I considered lying, but my professional ethics wouldn't allow it. "Richard Mitchell is my father," I admitted. "If you'd prefer another attorney handle the case." "Not at all," Winters interrupted, looking oddly pleased. "In fact, this makes things even more interesting. Who better to take down Richard Mitchell than someone who knows exactly how he operates?" The way he said it, with a predatory gleam in his eye, made me uncomfortable. This wasn't about justice or contract law for him. This was about destroying a rival. And he wanted to use me as his weapon. Back in my office, I stared out the window at the Boston skyline. The glass towers of the financial district gleamed in the afternoon sun, monuments to success and failure alike. Somewhere out there was the half-finished skeleton of my father's dream project, the tower that was supposed to cement his legacy. My phone rang, displaying my mother's number. I hesitated before answering, unsure if Jake had told her about my involvement in the case. "Alexandra?" My mother's voice sounded small and frightened. "Can you come to the house? Your father, he's not well." "What's wrong?" Immediate concern overrode everything else. For all his faults, he was still my father. "He received some kind of legal notice today. Something about the house being foreclosed on. He collapsed in his study. The doctor says it was just stress, but—" Her voice broke. "He's asking for you." I froze. The foreclosure notice shouldn't have been delivered yet. We hadn't even filed the paperwork. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised, already grabbing my coat. The drive to Lexington took 40 minutes in midday traffic. With each mile, my anxiety grew. What did my father want with me? Had he somehow learned of my involvement with the bank? And if the foreclosure notice wasn't from Suffolk Bank, who had sent it? As I pulled into the long driveway of my childhood home, I was struck by how unchanged it looked. The manicured lawn, the stately columns, the wraparound porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings reading while trying to avoid my father's critical gaze. This house had been both haven and prison for me, a place of comfort and confinement. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell, pulling me into a tight hug. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. She looked older than when I'd last seen her, new lines of worry etched around her eyes. "Where is he?" I asked, stepping into the marble-floored foyer. "In his study. The doctor gave him something to calm him down, but he insisted on waiting for you." She wrung her hands nervously. "Alexandra, I don't understand what's happening. Your father won't explain. Something about loans and the house being taken away?" I took her hands in mine. "Mom, did you know Dad used the house as collateral for a business loan?" The color drained from her face. "What? No, that's impossible. This house is in both our names. He couldn't have done that without my signature." "He forged it," I said gently, watching her face crumple as the implications sank in. "Mom, there's more. Mitchell Properties is in serious financial trouble. Dad has defaulted on several loans. The banks are moving to foreclose on all of his properties, including this house." My mother sank onto the bench in the foyer, her legs seemingly unable to support her anymore. "But this is our home," she said faintly. "Where will we go?" Before I could answer, a voice came from the doorway of the study. So they sent you to deliver the news? Poetic justice, I suppose. My father stood there, looking smaller than I remembered. His normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes. But his voice still carried that edge of contempt I knew all too well. I didn't come here to gloat, Dad, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Mom called me because she was worried about you. He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Worried? About me? The great Richard Mitchell, brought low by his own daughter. Tell me, Alexandra, how long have you been planning this revenge? Richard, my mother gasped, what are you talking about? I met my father's gaze unflinchingly. I was assigned to Suffolk Bank's case against Mitchell Properties yesterday. I haven't filed any foreclosure paperwork yet. Whatever notice you received today, it wasn't from me or my firm. He waved a piece of paper in his hand. This came from Madison Financial. They're calling in their loan on the house. Effective immediately. Madison Financial, a smaller local bank that I had no connection to. Then it has nothing to do with me, I said, and everything to do with the fact that you've defaulted on multiple loans from multiple banks. Because the Seaport project went over budget? He snapped. These things happen in real estate development. If I had a little more time, I could turn it all around. By leveraging more assets you don't actually own? I challenged, thinking of my mother's forged signature. By digging yourself deeper into debt? His face darkened with familiar anger. You know nothing about business. You're just a paper pusher, a cog in someone else's machine. The old insults, designed to make me feel small. But this time, they didn't land. No, Dad, I'm an attorney who understands contract law. And what you've done, forging Mom's signature, misrepresenting assets to lenders. That's fraud. You could go to prison. My mother made a small, distressed sound. My father's face went ashen. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. I did what I had to do to save the company, he said, his voice losing its edge. Everything I've built over 30 years, I couldn't just watch it crumble. Even if it meant risking Mom's home, her security, I shook my head in disbelief. Did you ever think about what would happen to her if your gamble didn't pay off? He had no answer for that. He slumped back against the doorframe, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. The paper in his hand, the foreclosure notice from Madison Financial, fluttered to the floor. My mother rose shakily from the bench and retrieved it. As she read, tears began to slide down her cheeks. 30 days, she whispered. They're giving us 30 days to vacate. I took the notice from her, scanning it quickly. Madison Financial had indeed accelerated their loan and was moving to foreclose. The 30-day timeline was aggressive but legal. My father had clearly breached multiple covenant clauses in the loan agreement. Mom, you can come stay with me while we figure this out, I said, putting an arm around her shoulders. Figure what out? My father interjected bitterly. It's over. Madison Financial is just the first. The others will follow. By the end of the month, I'll have nothing left. I thought about Suffolk Bank, about the case file sitting on my desk. If I proceeded with their foreclosure action, it would indeed be the final nail in my father's coffin. His business, his reputation, everything he valued, would be gone. Looking at him now, diminished, frightened, faced with the consequences of his own actions, I felt an unexpected emotion, pity, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a hollow sadness for a man who had defined himself by his success and now had to face failure. Alexandra, he said, using my full name without the usual disdain, you're a good lawyer. Better than I ever gave you credit for. Can you help me? Those 4 words hung in the air between us, heavy with decades of complicated history. Can you help me? Coming from my father, Richard Mitchell, a man who had never asked for help in his life. They landed like thunder. I studied his face, searching for the manipulation, the angle, but found only desperation. For the first time, he was looking at me not as his disappointment, but as his potential salvation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I don't know if I can, I answered honestly, still processing the ethical implications. I'm representing Suffolk Bank in their case against you. Legally, my hands are tied. My mother looked between us, confusion etched across her face. You're working against your own father's company? It's my job, Mom, I explained gently. I was assigned the case before I knew who was involved. I didn't mention that I'd had the opportunity to recuse myself and had chosen not to. My father sank into his leather chair, the same one from which he'd dispensed so many harsh judgments throughout my childhood. Of course, he said bitterly. The perfect revenge, isn't it? I spend years telling you you'll never amount to anything, and now you get to prove me wrong by taking everything I have. This isn't about revenge, I insisted, though a small voice inside me wondered if I was being entirely truthful. And this situation is of your own making. You forged Mom's signature. You over-leveraged the company. You made promises to banks that you couldn't keep. Richard, is this true? My mother's voice was barely above a whisper. Did you really forge my signature to put our home at risk? He couldn't meet her eyes. I was going to fix it before you ever found out. The Seaport project was supposed to be my legacy, Elizabeth. Our legacy. When it's finished, it would have set us up for life, set Jake up for life. I noticed he didn't mention me in those future plans. Some things never changed. But it's not finished, I pointed out. And now you're out of money and out of time. The banks have been patient, but that patience has run out. You sound almost pleased, he snapped. I'm not pleased, Dad. I'm being realistic. Something you apparently haven't been for quite some time. My mother wiped away her tears and straightened her shoulders. A gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. She'd always been the strong one, bending without breaking under my father's domineering personality. What are our options, Alexandra? She asked, her voice steadier now. There must be something we can do. I hesitated, weighing my professional obligations against my family ties. I can't officially advise you while I'm representing Suffolk Bank, I said finally. But I can suggest you get a good bankruptcy attorney. Chapter 11 might buy you some time to restructure. My father scoffed. Bankruptcy? Do you have any idea what that would do to my reputation? To the Mitchell name? It would save it, I countered. It's better than losing everything and potentially facing fraud charges. The word, fraud, hung between us like a guillotine blade. My father paled visibly. Would they really press charges? My mother asked, her voice small again. I chose my words carefully. It depends on how vindictive the banks want to be. Forging signatures on loan documents is a federal offense. If they wanted to make an example of you. I left the sentence unfinished. The implications were clear enough. My father stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the sprawling property that had been in his family for generations. So those are my choices? Bankruptcy and public humiliation, or prison. There might be a third option, I said slowly, an idea taking shape. If you could find a buyer for the Seaport project, someone willing to take it over at its current stage of development, you might be able to satisfy enough of the debt to keep the family home, at least. My father turned, a glimmer of his old calculating self returning to his eyes. Who would buy an unfinished project that's already millions over budget? I don't know, I admitted. But it's worth exploring before you surrender completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Harrington. Meeting with Suffolk Bank tomorrow, 9 a.m. They want to accelerate the foreclosure process. Be prepared. I stared at the screen, my stomach knotting. If Suffolk moved to foreclose immediately, any chance of my father finding a solution would evaporate. The clock was ticking faster than I'd realized. I have to go, I said, tucking my phone away. Dad, get a lawyer, a good one, today. Mom, pack a bag, just in case. You can stay with me if you need to. My mother nodded, but my father remained by the window, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As I reached the study door, he spoke again. At your graduation, he said quietly, when I called you my biggest mistake, I didn't mean, don't. I cut him off. We both know you meant every word. Let's not pretend otherwise now, just because you need my help. The drive back to Boston was a blur of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to help my parents, particularly my mother, who was an innocent victim in all this. Another part felt a vindictive satisfaction in seeing my father brought low by his own hubris. And threading through it all was the uncomfortable knowledge that I was now in a position of power over the man who had made me feel powerless for so long. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Back at my office, I stayed late into the night, poring over the case files again. This time, I was looking not for ways to expedite the foreclosure, but for potential weaknesses in Suffolk Bank's position, anything that might buy my father more time. There wasn't much. The loan documents were airtight, the default clear-cut. Suffolk Bank had every legal right to foreclose, and as their attorney, I had an ethical obligation to represent their interests to the best of my ability. A soft knock at my office door startled me. Margaret stood there, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "It's almost midnight, Alexandra," she said. "The case isn't going anywhere." I straightened the papers on my desk, trying to look busy rather than conflicted. Just being thorough. She entered and closed the door behind her. "Harold Winters called me this evening. He was quite impressed with your presentation. So impressed, in fact, that he wants to accelerate the timeline. He's hoping we can file for foreclosure by the end of the week." My heart sank. That's unusually aggressive. Margaret gave me a knowing look. "It is, almost as if he has a personal vendetta against Mitchell Properties." She paused. "Or its owner." "What are you suggesting?" She sat down across from me, her gaze direct. "I'm suggesting that Winters might be using this firm, and you specifically, to settle some old score with your father. And I'm not comfortable with that." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "So you're taking me off the case?" "Not necessarily. But I am giving you some latitude. Suffolk Bank is an important client, but they don't dictate our tactics or our timeline. If you need more time to properly prepare this case, you have it." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Margaret." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "Alexandra, whatever history exists between you and your father, don't let it cloud your judgment. Not for his sake, but for yours." After she left, I sat in the quiet of my office, her words echoing in my mind. Was I letting my complicated feelings toward my father affect my professional judgment? And if so, in which direction? The next morning, I arrived at the meeting with Suffolk Bank, armed with a strategy that would technically serve their interests while buying my father a little more time. It was the best compromise I could manage within my ethical boundaries. "Ms. Mitchell," Harold Winters greeted me with an oily smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you have good news for us." "I've completed my review of the case," I began, "and while Mitchell Properties is clearly in default, I believe a slightly more measured approach to foreclosure would better serve Suffolk Bank's interests." Winters frowned. "How so?" "Rushing to foreclose could potentially diminish the value of the assets," I explained. "The Seaport project, in particular, would be worth significantly more if we allow time for a potential buyer to step forward, someone who might be willing to complete the development rather than leave it as an unfinished shell." "And who would benefit most from such a delay?" Winters asked, his tone sharpening. "Suffolk Bank or Richard Mitchell?" I met his gaze steadily. "Both, potentially. Mitchell gets time to find a buyer, and Suffolk gets maximum return on its investment. It's a win-win. Unless no buyer materializes, and we've wasted valuable time while Mitchell finds new ways to shield his assets. That's why I'm suggesting a structured approach," I countered. "We file the initial foreclosure paperwork now, establishing our claim, but set a slightly longer timeline for the actual seizure. 30 days instead of the 14 you originally proposed." Winters leaned back, studying me. "Your father must be proud to have such a clever attorney for a daughter." The implication was clear. He suspected I was deliberately trying to help my father. He wasn't entirely wrong. but I had crafted my argument to genuinely serve Suffolk Bank's interests as well. My relationship with my father is irrelevant to this case, I said coolly. I'm simply advising the course of action that I believe will result in the best outcome for my client. After several more minutes of back and forth, Winters reluctantly agreed to the 30-day timeline. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small window for my father to attempt some kind of miracle. As I was gathering my materials to leave, Winters stopped me with a hand on my arm. You know, I once applied for a job at Mitchell Properties, right out of business school. Your father interviewed me personally. Do you know what he said? I shook my head, though I could imagine. He said I lacked vision, that I was too cautious to ever succeed in real estate development. Winters' smile was cold. I've been proving him wrong for 20 years, building my career at Suffolk Bank. And now, I get to watch his empire crumble. Funny how life works out, isn't it? The personal vendetta Margaret had suspected was confirmed. This wasn't just business for Winters, it was payback. And I was caught in the middle. Back at my office, I called Jake to update him on the situation. Dad has 30 days before Suffolk moves to seize everything, I explained. It's not much time, but it's better than nothing. How did you manage that? Jake sounded surprised and a little suspicious. I convinced them it was in their best interest to wait for a potential buyer. It might actually be true, if you can find someone quickly. Jake was silent for a moment. Alex, why are you helping? After everything Dad said to you, everything he's done. It was a question I'd been asking myself since walking into my childhood home the day before. I'm not doing it for him, I said finally. I'm doing it for Mom, and maybe a little bit for myself, to prove I'm not the vindictive failure he always thought I was. You were never a failure, Jake said quietly. I should have said that more often over the years. I'm sorry, Alex. His apology, unexpected and sincere, brought tears to my eyes. It's not your fault. Dad played favorites, Jake. Maybe not, but I could have stood up for you more, been a better brother. Water under the bridge, I assured him. Right now, we need to focus on saving Mom's home at least. The company might be beyond salvation at this point. Dad won't accept that, Jake warned. He still thinks he can save everything. Then he's delusional. The numbers don't lie. After hanging up, I sat staring at my computer screen, where I'd pulled up the financial details of my father's company. The extent of the damage was staggering. The Seaport project had become a money pit, draining resources from every other aspect of Mitchell Properties. And my father, too proud to admit defeat, had kept doubling down, leveraging more and more assets in a desperate attempt to complete his dream project. It was, I realized with a jolt, exactly what he'd always accused me of, being too emotional, not strategic enough. He'd let his ego override his business sense, and now he was paying the price. My phone rang. My mother, calling from a number I didn't recognize. Alexandra? It's Mom. I'm at Jake's apartment. Her voice was strained. Your father and I had a terrible fight after you left. I couldn't stay in that house another night. Are you okay? I asked, immediately concerned. I'm fine, just processing everything. He admitted to more than just forging my signature, Alexandra. He's been hiding the extent of his financial troubles for over a year. Emptying our joint accounts, maxing out credit cards in my name. She took a shaky breath. Our entire retirement fund is gone. Cold anger washed over me. It was one thing for my father to risk his own financial stability on his ambitious project, but to steal from my mother? To destroy her security without her knowledge or consent? That crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Mom, you need to consult an attorney of your own, I said firmly. Someone who specializes in divorce and financial fraud. Divorce? She sounded shocked, though I couldn't understand why. Alexandra, he's still your father. Yes, he's made terrible mistakes, but… Mom, this isn't about one mistake. This is about a pattern of behavior. He's been systematically lying to you, stealing from you, putting your future at risk, all while treating you like a secondary consideration in his life. You deserve better. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was different. stronger, more resolved. You're right. I do deserve better. But divorce is a big step. Just talk to an attorney, I urged. Get all the information so you can make an informed decision. I will, she promised. Jake's helping me make some calls tomorrow. After we hung up, I leaned back in my chair, emotionally drained. What had begun as a straightforward foreclosure case had evolved into something far more complex, a potential dismantling of my entire family structure. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. I walked a precarious ethical line, fulfilling my obligations to Suffolk Bank, while providing what indirect assistance I could to my mother and brother. My father, I heard through Jake, had retreated into his office at Mitchell Properties, working frantically to find a buyer for the Seaport project before the foreclosure deadline. A week after our confrontation at the family home, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My father stood in the doorway, looking haggard but somehow more focused than he had during our last encounter. "Alexandra," he said, nodding stiffly, "do you have a moment?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, surprised by his appearance. "What can I do for you, Dad?" He sat down, his movements careful as though he were in pain. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this past week. About the company, about my choices, about you." I kept my expression neutral, unwilling to show how much his words affected me. And I owe you an apology. A lifetime of apologies, really. He ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. "I was wrong about you, always have been. The way you've handled this situation, professional, ethical, but still finding ways to help your family. It's impressive. More than impressive. It's exactly the kind of leadership I should have recognized in you years ago." I blinked, caught off guard by this unexpected contrition. What brought this on? Losing everything has a way of clarifying what matters, he said with a wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Elizabeth left me. Did she tell you?" "She mentioned she was considering it." "She's staying with Jake now, filing for divorce. Can't say I blame her." He sighed heavily. "The thing is, Alexandra, I don't care about losing the money, or even the company, as much as I thought I would. But losing my family." His voice cracked slightly. "That's what's keeping me up at night." I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation, the calculated charm he'd always been able to turn on when it suited his purposes. But all I saw was a tired old man facing the consequences of his actions for perhaps the first time in his life. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I've found a potential buyer for the Seaport project," he said, straightening in his chair. "Chandler Development Group. They're interested in taking it over, completing it, and rebranding it as part of their urban renewal portfolio." Hope flickered briefly. Chandler was a reputable firm with deep pockets. If they were seriously interested, this might actually work. That's good news. Have they made a formal offer? Not yet. They want to meet with all stakeholders first, including representatives from the banks holding the loans. He met my gaze directly. "That's why I'm here. I need you to arrange a meeting with Suffolk Bank." And there it was. The request beneath the apology, the angle I'd been waiting for. My father hadn't changed. He was still using whatever tools were at his disposal to get what he wanted. "I can't do that, Dad. It would be a conflict of interest. You're their attorney. You have influence. I represent them in a foreclosure action against you. Arranging a meeting between you and a potential buyer would be crossing a line." Frustration flashed across his face, the familiar precursor to anger that I'd seen countless times growing up. But instead of exploding, he took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right, I apologize for asking. It was inappropriate." He stood to leave. "I'll have my attorney reach out through proper channels." As he reached the door, I called after him. "Dad, for what it's worth, I hope it works out with Chandler. For Mom's sake, if nothing else." He paused, his back to me. "I know you don't believe me, Alexandra, but I am sorry. For all of it. You deserved a better father than the one you got." After he left, I sat motionless, his words replaying in my mind. An apology, something I'd waited my entire life to hear. But was it sincere, or just another tactic in his arsenal of manipulation? And even if it was sincere, was it enough to erase decades of damage? I didn't have answers to those questions. What I did have was a job to do, and ethical lines I refused to cross no matter how complicated my feelings toward my father might be. 2 days later, Suffolk Bank received a formal communication from Mitchell Properties, announcing Chandler Development Group's interest in acquiring the Seaport project. Harold Winters called an emergency meeting to discuss the development. "This changes nothing," he insisted, pacing the conference room like a caged predator. "We proceed with foreclosure as planned." "With respect, Mr. Winters," I interjected, "if Chandler is serious, this could result in a better outcome for all parties. Suffolk Bank would recoup more of its investment than through a foreclosure auction. And Richard Mitchell would escape the consequences of his actions." Winters countered. Again, I met his gaze steadily. "This isn't about my father. It's about making the best business decision for your bank." The meeting ended in a stalemate, with Winters reluctantly agreeing to review Chandler's proposal once it was formally submitted. As I gathered my materials, Margaret pulled me aside. "You're walking a fine line, Alexandra," she warned quietly. "Be careful." "I'm doing my job," I insisted, advising my client on the best course of action. She studied me for a moment. "Just remember what I said before. Don't let your history with your father cloud your judgment in either direction." I nodded, understanding her concern. Was I pushing for Suffolk to consider Chandler's offer because it truly was the best business decision, or because I wanted to help my father despite everything? I wasn't entirely sure myself. The following week passed in a high-stakes dance of legal maneuvers and tense negotiations. Chandler Development Group submitted their formal offer to purchase the Seaport project for $8. $2 million, significantly less than what my father had invested, but enough to satisfy the most pressing debts and potentially save the family home. Suffolk Bank, under Harold Winters' direction, countered with demands for additional guarantees and accelerated payment terms, clearly trying to scuttle the deal without openly rejecting it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I watched these developments from a careful distance, maintaining my professional obligations to Suffolk Bank while privately hoping the deal would succeed. My mother had moved in with me temporarily, taking the guest bedroom in my Back Bay apartment while she sorted through the wreckage of her 40-year marriage. "I never thought I'd start over at 62, she confessed one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony. The lights of Boston Harbor twinkled in the distance, a constellation of human ambition. It's terrifying but also exhilarating in a strange way. I studied her profile, noticing a lightness that hadn't been there before. "You seem different, Mom," she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I feel different. For decades I shaped myself around your father's expectations, his moods, his dreams. Now I'm discovering who Elizabeth Mitchell is without Richard defining her." "And who is she?" I asked, genuinely curious. She laughed softly. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'm enjoying finding out." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You know, watching you these past weeks, how you've handled this impossible situation with such integrity and strength. It's been inspirational, Alexandra. You've shown me what courage looks like." Her words caught me off guard. My mother had always been supportive, but in a quiet, background way. To hear her express such direct admiration felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. "I learned it from you," I told her. "All those years of watching you navigate Dad's difficult personality with grace. You were always stronger than you let yourself believe." She shook her head. "I wasn't strong. I was accommodating. There's a difference. What you're doing, standing your ground professionally while still trying to find a compassionate solution, that's true strength." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the wine warming us against the early autumn chill. Finally, she spoke again. "What will happen if the Chandler deal falls through?" I sighed, not wanting to worry her but unwilling to sugarcoat the reality. "Suffolk Bank will foreclose, along with the other lenders. Dad will lose everything: the company, The seaport project, the house. Given the forged signatures and misrepresentation of assets, criminal charges are a real possibility. She nodded, absorbing this. And if the deal goes through? Best case scenario? Dad keeps the company. Though significantly downsized, the house might be saved, depending on how the proceeds are allocated among the various debts. The fraud issues would likely be settled civilly rather than criminally. And what about us? You and me? Her question held layers of meaning. I considered this carefully. I think that's up to us, Mom. Regardless of what happens with Dad or the company, you and I are forging a new kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect and honesty. I'd like to keep building on that. She smiled again, raising her glass in a small toast. 2 new beginnings, then. 2 new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find Margaret waiting for me, her expression grave. Suffolk Bank has rejected Chandler's offer, she announced without preamble. Winters is instructing us to proceed with immediate foreclosure. My heart sank. Did he give a reason? Officially, insufficient guarantees and concerns about Chandler's financing. Unofficially? She raised an eyebrow. I think we both know this is personal for him. I nodded, disappointment and frustration churning inside me. What's our next step? We filed the foreclosure paperwork today as instructed. Unless... She gave me a meaningful look. Unless what? Unless someone could persuade Chandler to improve their offer significantly. Enough to make it impossible for Winters to justify rejecting it to his board of directors. I understood what she was suggesting, but the ethical implications troubled me. I can't directly intervene in negotiations between Mitchell Properties and Chandler. It would be a clear conflict of interest. No, Margaret agreed. But you could share your professional assessment with Suffolk Bank's board of directors. Point out that Winters might be letting personal feelings cloud his business judgment. The board members care about the bottom line, not old grudges. It was a fine line, but potentially within ethical boundaries if handled carefully. I'll think about it. I promised. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Back in my office, I was reviewing the foreclosure documents when Jake called, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Alex, Dad's been hospitalized. Possible heart attack. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Despite everything, the news hit like a physical blow. Is he? He's stable for now. They're doing tests. Can you come to Massachusetts General? I'll be there in 20 minutes. I found Jake in the cardiac unit waiting room, pacing like a caged animal. He looked up when I entered, relief washing over his exhausted face. They're saying it was a severe anxiety attack, not a heart attack, he updated me. But they're keeping him for observation and running more tests to be sure. What happened? Jake ran a hand through his disheveled hair. He was in a meeting with Chandler when Suffolk's rejection came through. Apparently he just collapsed, started gasping for air, clutching his chest. The Chandler execs thought he was dying. A wave of guilt washed over me. If I had pushed harder with Suffolk Bank, advocated more strongly for considering Chandler's offer. Stop it, Jake said, reading my expression. This isn't your fault. Dad did this to himself. The financial mess, the stress, all of it. Have you told Mom? He nodded. She's on her way. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the hospital's antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting creating a surreal atmosphere. Finally, Jake spoke again, his voice lower. There's something else you should know. Before Dad collapsed, the Chandler executives were discussing increasing their offer. They really want the project, Alex. They see its potential. But with Suffolk's rejection, and now Dad's health crisis, I straightened, my legal mind clicking into gear despite the emotional circumstances. The deal isn't dead yet. If Chandler is still interested, and if we can get a more favorable response from Suffolk Bank, How? Winters clearly has it out for Dad. Winters isn't Suffolk Bank, he's just one executive. The board makes the final decisions on deals this size. A doctor appeared before Jake could respond, clipboard in hand. Family of Richard Mitchell? We both stood. How is he? Jake asked. Stable. Not a heart attack, as we suspected, but a severe anxiety event that mimicked cardiac symptoms. We're still running some tests, but the initial results are encouraging. You can see him now if you'd like. She led us to a private room where our father lay connected to various monitors, looking smaller and frailer than I'd ever seen him. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as we entered. Jake. Alexandra. His voice was weak but clear. Come to see the mighty Richard Mitchell laid low? Even now, the defensive sarcasm. Some things never changed. We came because we were worried about you, Jake said, taking the chair beside the bed. How are you feeling? Like a fool, our father admitted, surprising me. Collapsing in front of the Chandler executives like some fragile old man. Whatever slim chance we had of salvaging that deal, I probably destroyed it with my melodrama. Don't worry about the deal right now, Jake advised. Focus on getting better. But my father's eyes had already shifted to me, his gaze sharpening despite his physical weakness. Suffolk rejected the offer. Your bank. It's not my bank, I corrected gently. I represent them in a specific legal matter, that's all. Can you talk to them? Make them reconsider? There it was again. The expectation that I would somehow use my position to bail him out, despite the ethical complications. Before I could respond, the door opened and my mother entered, her face composed but concern evident in her eyes. Richard, she said, nodding coolly to my father before turning to me and Jake. Could I have a moment alone with your father, please? We stepped out into the hallway, exchanging curious glances. Through the small window in the door, I could see my mother speaking intently, my father listening with an uncharacteristic stillness. What do you think she's saying to him? Jake wondered. I have no idea, but whatever it is, he's actually listening for once. After about 10 minutes, my mother emerged, her expression resolved. Jake, would you mind getting me a coffee? Alexandra, could you walk with me for a moment? Once we were alone in a quiet corner of the waiting area, my mother turned to me. I've made a decision, she announced. I'm going to use my separate inheritance from my parents to help with the Chandler deal. I stared at her in shock. Mom, no. That money is your safety net. You can't risk it on Dad's failing company. She held up a hand. Not for Richard. For the house. I've spoken with my attorney, and we believe we can structure a deal where my funds are used specifically to satisfy the loan against the house, separate from the Seaport project negotiations. I'll then own the house outright, giving me security, while potentially allowing the Chandler deal to proceed for the remaining assets. I considered this, impressed by her strategic thinking. That might actually work. But Mom, are you sure? After everything Dad's done? Her eyes were clear and determined. This isn't about Richard. It's about my home of 40 years, which I'm not ready to lose. And it's about giving you and Jake a chance to salvage something from this mess. She took my hands in hers. Alexandra, I know you've been walking an impossible ethical line. This gives you a way forward. If I satisfy the loan on the house separately, you can focus on helping Suffolk Bank reach the best possible outcome with Chandler, without compromising your professional integrity. I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by her wisdom and generosity. When did you get so savvy about financial restructuring? She laughed softly. I've been paying attention all these years, even when no one thought I was. Now, what's our next step? With my mother's unexpected intervention providing a new angle, I returned to the office the next day with a renewed sense of purpose. Using Margaret's suggestion as a framework, I prepared a detailed analysis for Suffolk Bank's board of directors, outlining why accepting an improved offer from Chandler would result in better financial outcomes than proceeding with foreclosure. I was careful to frame my arguments purely in terms of the bank's interests, focusing on recovery percentages, market conditions, and the costs associated with taking possession of an unfinished development project. I made no mention of my personal connection to the case beyond the required disclosure that had been made at the outset. Margaret reviewed my analysis, making a few strategic adjustments before forwarding it to the board with her endorsement. "This is excellent work, Alexandra," she said. "Professional, thorough, and persuasive without crossing any ethical lines. Now we wait." The waiting was excruciating. My father was released from the hospital with orders to reduce stress, a nearly impossible prescription given the circumstances. My mother moved forward with her plan to use her inheritance to secure the family home, working with her attorney to structure the transaction properly. Jake continued discussions with Chandler, who remained interested but wary given the complications with Suffolk Bank. 3 days after I submitted my analysis to Suffolk's board, I received a call from Margaret. "The board has instructed Winters to reconsider Chandler's offer, provided they increase it by at least 12% and agree to an accelerated payment schedule," she informed me, satisfaction evident in her voice. "They were quite impressed by your analysis, particularly the comparison of recovery rates between foreclosure and structured sale scenarios." Relief washed over me. It wasn't a guaranteed solution, but it was a crack in the door that had seemed firmly shut. "Has Winters been informed?" "Oh yes," Margaret replied, a hint of amusement in her tone. "He's not pleased, but he's a company man at heart. He'll follow the board's direction, however reluctantly." The next weeks were a whirlwind of negotiations, legal documents, and cautious hope. Chandler increased their offer by 15%, exceeding Suffolk Bank's minimum requirement. My mother completed her separate transaction to secure the family home, which now belonged solely to her. My father, chastened by his health scare and the near-complete collapse of his company, participated in negotiations with uncharacteristic humility. Finally, 39 days after Suffolk Bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings, 1 day before the deadline, all parties signed the restructured deal. Chandler Development Group would acquire the Seaport project and a majority stake in Mitchell Properties. Suffolk Bank and the other lenders would recover approximately 82% of their original investments, less than full repayment, but significantly more than they would likely have recovered through foreclosure. As for my father, he would retain a minority interest in the company he had built, along with a 2-year consulting contract with Chandler to assist with the transition. It was a dramatic step down from his previous position, but it preserved his professional dignity and kept him from financial ruin. The threat of criminal charges related to the forged loan documents was resolved through civil settlements, with my mother declining to pursue action once her ownership of the house was secured. The night after the closing, my mother hosted a small dinner at what was now officially her home. Jake and I attended, along with my father, invited not as the man of the house, but as a guest in what had once been his domain. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. "A toast," my mother said, raising her glass as we sat around the dining table that had witnessed so many tense family moments over the years. "To new beginnings, honest dealings, and the power of working together rather than against each other." We clinked glasses, the atmosphere tentatively optimistic. My father, looking better than he had in weeks now that the worst of the crisis had passed, cleared his throat. "I owe all of you an apology," he said, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "My pride and ambition nearly destroyed everything. This family, the company, my reputation. If not for your interventions, I would have lost it all." He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine directly. "Especially you, Alexandra. You had every reason to let me fail after how I've treated you. That comment at your graduation, calling you my biggest mistake, it was unforgivable. Yet you still found a way to help while maintaining your professional integrity. You're a better person than I ever taught you to be." It wasn't a perfect apology. My father would always be who he was, with all his flaws and limitations. But it was sincere, and in that moment it was enough. "I didn't do it for your approval," I told him honestly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. For Mom, for Jake, for myself, and yes, even for you. Because despite everything, you're still my father." He nodded, accepting this without argument, perhaps the clearest sign of how much the experience had changed him. "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope, with time, I might earn back some measure of your respect." "That's a start," I acknowledged, not making promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Some wounds took longer to heal than others. After dinner, I found myself alone with my father on the back porch, both of us looking out at the garden my mother had tended for decades. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of turning leaves. "What will you do now?" I asked him. "With Chandler running the company?" He sighed, his breath visible in the cool night. "Adjust to a new reality. Learn to be valuable in different ways." He glanced at me. "It's not unlike what you've had to do your entire life. Finding your value in a world that didn't always appreciate what you had to offer." The insight surprised me. This new awareness of parallels between us that he'd never acknowledged before. "It's not easy," I said, "rebuilding your sense of self when the foundation shifts." "No," he agreed, "but maybe we're more alike than I ever allowed myself to see." That same determination, that refusal to give up, you got that from me, for better or worse. The difference is, you've channeled it more wisely. We stood in companionable silence for a while, the tension between us not gone, but transformed into something more manageable, more open to future healing. 6 months later, I sat in Margaret Harrington's office, listening with stunned disbelief as she outlined her proposal. "Partnership track," she repeated, seeing my expression. "Your handling of the Suffolk Bank matter demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and integrity we value at this firm. The board is unanimously in favor." I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, from the devastated graduate whose father had publicly called her his biggest mistake, to a respected attorney being offered partnership at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but each challenge had strengthened me, each setback had taught me something valuable. "I'm honored," I told Margaret sincerely. "And I accept." That evening, I called my mother to share the news. She was thriving in her new independence, renovating parts of the house to reflect her own taste for the first time, taking classes at a local college, building a life defined by her own choices rather than my father's demands. "I'm so proud of you, Alexandra," she said warmly, though not surprised. "You've always been exceptional, even when others couldn't see it." "Including me," I admitted. For a long time, I saw myself through Dad's eyes, as someone who would never quite measure up. "And now?" I smiled, thinking of the confident attorney I saw in the mirror each morning, the woman who had navigated an impossible situation with integrity, who had helped save her family without sacrificing her principles. "Now I see myself clearly," I told her. "Strengths and weaknesses, successes and failures, all mine, defined by me and no one else." After we hung up, I walked to my balcony and looked out at the Boston skyline, the city lights reflecting on the harbor waters. Somewhere in that glittering landscape was the Seaport Project, now rising under Chandler's direction. My father was still involved as a consultant, finding a new role that utilized his experience without feeding his worst tendencies. Jake was thriving in his position at the restructured Mitchell Properties, growing into leadership in ways that made me genuinely proud of the man he was becoming. And I was exactly where I was meant to be, not defined by my father's cruel words at graduation or by my response to them, but by the sum of all my choices, all my efforts, all my resilience in the face of challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. The journey from that devastating moment at graduation to this hard-won peace hadn't been about foreclosing on my father's dream house in the end. It had been about foreclosing on the power his opinions had held over me for so long, reclaiming the right to define my own worth, my own success, my own path forward. Some debts can never be fully repaid. Some wounds never completely heal. But in letting go of the need for my father's approval, I had found something far more valuable: my own unwavering belief in myself. And that, I now understood, was the true foundation upon which all lasting success is built. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.